there, I'm Marley Bird, proud spokesperson for Red Heart Yarns. In this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know to make the child's trendy fur vest. This is a great little vest for the young girl in your life. The pattern is sized from a size 2 to a size 10, so this is a great pattern for you to go out and tackle. As I said, I'm going to show you everything you need to know to make this particular vest. All you need to do is go download that free pattern over on redheart.com. I'll put the link to it right down there in the description, and we can get started. The child's trendy fur vest is a super cute vest, and it combines two different yarns to make it. First one is the soft baby steps yarn, and the second one is the fur yarn by Red Heart Boutique. Both of those yarns are available over on redheart.com. Hopefully you've downloaded your pattern at this point and we can get started. If you look down here, you can see I have my very own copy of the pattern. And what's really important about this particular pattern and printing it out is that there's a chance for you to go ahead and use your highlighter and highlight the size and the length that you're going to be doing. So for example, if we were going to do the smallest size, it says the finished chest is a 24 inches, and the finished length would be 13 inches. Now, those particular numbers are the first number outside of the parenthesis. So knowing that I'm going to use numbers that are the first ones outside of the parentheses, I would come down here and I would highlight all the numbers that are the first ones outside of the parenthesis. So that way I know that those are the numbers that really pertain to the size I'm making. If I was making one of the other sizes, same thing happens. Say it's two numbers within the parenthesis, I would come down here and highlight my number, two numbers within the parenthesis. This is just a really good habit to get into so that you don't lose track of where you are or what size you're making if you happen to set this down and go on and work on maybe something else you're working on. So the first thing you need to do is highlight your pattern so that you don't get lost. The second thing you need to do is learn how to work with these two yarns and work in the pattern stitch. The pattern stitch for this particular pattern is just garter stitch, but what makes it difficult is combining the two different yarns. Look down here, I'm going to show you what I mean. The first thing we're going to do is get two strands of our soft baby steps yarn. Throughout the entire pattern, we are going to hold two strands together of this particular yarn. Now for this pattern, I'm going to choose to do a long tail cast on because I really like the way that cast on stitch works with this particular garter stitch. So I'm having a slip, I just made a slip knot and I'm going to put that onto my needle. I'm going to take my tail yarn, I'm going to wrap it around my thumb. I'm going to take my working yarn and put it on the outside of my finger. I have a slingshot now. Once I have this slingshot, I'm really ready to get started. I'm going to maintain control of the slip knot that is on my needle. I'm going to start down at the bottom of my thumb and I'm going to go up my thumb, swivel around, go down my finger, come through the window, and the window is right there. It's this space that's created by the yarn on my thumb, so I'm coming through the window. And when I do that, I'm ready to drop the yarn off of my thumb, pull my tails, and I have a stitch on there. Now, just a reminder, you do have two strands, so it looks like you have 4 stitches, but you want to make sure that each strand, so these 2 strands counts at 1 stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and I would do that for a total number of cast on stitches as the pattern states. So if I were to make the smaller size, I would cast on 48 stitches, so on and so forth. Now for this particular sample, I'm not going to cast on the full amount because I just want to make this a quick down and dirty video for you guys to know how to do all the steps to make this particular pattern. So let's just say however many that is, that's the number I want to cast on, okay? I'm going to let that be. What I need to do now is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to place the needle with all the stitches on it into my left hand, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to begin knitting with the needle in my, the spare needle in my right hand. And I'm just doing a knit stitch. Now garter, for those of you who might not have ever heard that term before, it's just knitting every single row. I used to say if you are into purling, then you could also purl every single row, and you will also get garter stitch. But because the knit stitch typically is fairly easier for most people, they prefer to do a knit stitch for the garter stitch, okay? So we're just going to knit every single row, and I'm going to go down this whole row just as it states in the pattern. You will cast on and you'll knit one row. And then you move on to where you do your garter stitch fun stripe pattern. Now to do that, after we get to the end of this row, it's time to change yarns. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull in my boutique fur yarn, and I find it much easier to just take off the label and pull the yarn from the outside of this, okay? So you can find that there's the tail. This yarn is super thick. It is so furry, it makes me think of a Muppet. So it's so much fun to knit with. And the best thing to do when you're knitting with this is you can see this nice seam right there down the center of the yarn. When this yarn is resting on your needle, really use the tip of your needle to find that seam, and that will help you find your stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just hold the tail of this yarn right next to the working yarn I was using. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to knit with this new yarn. So I'm going to go in, making sure I'm going into both strands of my yarn, and I will yarn over with the fur and then pull through my color A. So it will be a little bit difficult here at the beginning as you're getting used to working with the fur yarn. But as I said, if you find that seam down the center of the yarn, you will have no problem finding the actual stitch. Okay, so I'm just literally knitting down all of these stitches that I had cast on, and you would do the same for whatever number of stitches you happen to cast on. When I get to the end of the row, I go ahead and I turn, and this is where I'm definitely going to be looking for that seam, just as I mentioned before. So you can see here, I am using a different color than my fur on purpose, so hopefully you guys can see these a little bit better. But for your actual vest, you could use the same color, as you'll see later on in a future example here. Now you can see it's kind of hard to see my stitch right there, but I can see my seam. There's my seam. And even if I couldn't see it, if I use the tip of my needle and just find the actual needle and then try and slip in there, I can feel, okay, I'm in a stitch. I can feel that seam. I'm going to yarn over and just pull it through and off, just like normal. So right here, I'm going to find my seam. I'm in it, yarn over, make sure I'm pulling through and I have a stitch on my needle, and off. So you'll carry on doing this just 2 rows. So when I get to the end of this row, I am going to go ahead, I'm going to drop the fur yarn, and I'm not going to use it, but I'm not going to cut it because I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to float it up the side, and I'm going to grab my white yarn that I was using before and just carry it up. So I'm going to get to the end here. I'm going to show you how that would work. So I sit down here to the very end, and again, I'm just trying to feel my stitches, find that seam stitch. So now that I'm at the very end, I'm not going to cut the fur. I would go ahead, I'd find my tail, and I would carry this up right up here just like this. Obviously it's not long enough to be working. It would normally be attached to a ball of yarn. And I would go ahead and I would work 4 rows with my color A again. And so now I'm going to have my color A back on the needles. Go ahead and continue on working in this pattern. Once you get past the 2 rows of fur, you'll do 4 rows of color A, 2 rows of fur. 4 rows of color A, 2 rows of fur. And you'll do that until your piece measures the distance that it states in the pattern. So however long that is. Join me back here. I'm going to show you how you're going to divide for the armholes. All right, welcome back. At this point, you've completed the full back and the partial fronts of the full vest. So it's time to divide and work just the right front and then the back and then the left front. And I'm going to show you how to do that. If you look down here, I have a small sample right here, and this one I have done color on color. So I'm holding 2 strands of pink and then 1 strand of the nice fuzzy fur yarn, okay? And I've gone ahead and I have finished on a row 4. So I am on my color A on row 4. I just finished with a row 4. And I'm getting ready to do the right front. Now for the right front, it says dividing row, and it says I'm going to knit X number of stitches, whatever the number is for you that you highlighted. So let's just say, because obviously this is a smaller little sample, let's just say it was knit 4 or 5 stitches. Let's say 5 stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and I would go in and I would knit my 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, after I knit these 5 stitches, it says you're going to leave the remaining stitches on a holder. Now, what does that mean by a holder? You can use one of those really great stitch holders that are available on the market. I'm just going to go ahead, I'm grabbing a random, this is Red Heart Soft yarn, and I have a tapestry needle, and I'm just going to go in to each one of these stitches, and I'm going to take it off, and I'm going to thread this Red Heart Soft yarn right through it. And I'm going to make sure that I have the yarn not going through any of the, like the yarn. I'm not going to split the yarn. I'm just going into the stitches, so that way, quite literally, they are just resting onto this nice taupe brown color yarn. And I'm just threading it through. So now those stitches are all still live. They're just resting on this nice brown color yarn, and I can just set that aside and not worry about it. All I'm going to worry about are these 5 stitches that I just knit. Now, obviously, as I said, you might have a different number of stitches right here that it said to knit and then leave your remaining stitches on there. So now you have just this number of stitches, and this is all we're going to deal with when we're doing any of the sort of the right front. Now that you've divided, and so we have these stitches ready to be worked for the right front, we're going to follow along with the pattern. The pattern states that you will continue on in the normal pattern until you reach row 3 or row 5, whichever one comes first, and you will then work a row of decreases, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So with the 2 strands together of color A, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a knit 1, so I will do a knit 1, and then a knit 2 together. And all a knit 2 together is, you're going to take this stitch, and with my right hand needle, I'm going to go into the second stitch and then come back through that first stitch. So now I have both stitches on the needle, yarn over, come through, and jump off. So what I did have was 2 stitches, and now I only have 1. So I've done a decrease, so I've done a shaping. And then I'm going to go ahead and I would knit to the end of the row. Now, the next part of the instructions say to continue in garter stitch, following along with the first stripe pattern, working a decrease row instead of row 3 or row 5 in the pattern until you only have X number of stitches remaining. After you've completed all of your decreases, you will continue on in the first stripes pattern until the front measures the distance that is written in the pattern from where you divided off. Once you do that, you will finish off with a couple rows of color A, and you will bind off and set aside. So I'm going to show you how to bind off. Let's pretend that I'm where I need to be, and I was going to bind off these stitches. I would go ahead, I would knit 1 stitch, knit the next stitch, have the back stitch jump up and over that front stitch, and that's 1 stitch bound off. So I would do that for each one of the stitches until I got to the very end here. Once I'm there, I grab a nice pair of scissors, snip my yarn, always leaving 4 to 6 inches so I can weave in tails later, and I go ahead and I would just leave that be. Okay, now that you know how to do the shaping for the right front and how to bind off for the shoulder seam, I want to show you how you're going to put stitches back on your needle. If you look down here, you can see once again that this is the piece as we put the stitches on the really nice piece of brown yarn. And I chose a yarn, as I said before, that is a contrasting color to the yarn I'm working with, so that way it's easy to see the actual stitches I want to put on my needle and the waste yarn, okay? So the first thing you're going to do is notice in the pattern that you are not going to return all of the stitches back to your needle. You're going to do a select number of stitches that will represent the back of your piece. So you want to make sure that you're only picking up that number of stitches. So let's just, for demonstration purposes, pick up 5 stitches. So if I'm going to pick up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches, I put my needle through those 5 stitches, and I can see, okay, I have 5 stitches. There's my waste yarn. I can go ahead, grab my waste yarn, and pull it out of the 5 stitches that I just put onto my needle. And I'm only pulling it out of those 5 stitches. These remaining stitches over here, I'm going to leave on there because those are going to be the left front of my piece. Now that my stitches are on my needle, I can go ahead and maneuver my circular needle here so that way I am ready to begin working this piece with the right side facing. And I have my 5 stitches. Of course, the number is going to be different in the pattern. And I would go ahead, I would grab my working yarn, and I would begin to work. Now, the first part of the instructions say that you're going to bind off immediately 8 stitches. So I would go ahead and I would knit 2 stitches, and I would have the front one jump over the back one and continue to bind off till I have 8 stitches bound off. Then I would continue on just knitting. Now, what does that mean? What we're really doing is those 8 stitches that we're binding off, that's going to be our underarm. That's our underarm stitches that we're binding off. So we've done our shaping on the outside of our vest. We're binding off at the beginning of this row for our back, and then we would work our back following these instructions. Once that is complete, obviously you bind those stitches off. We'd put these stitches on a needle, continue on in pattern as it's written. We would bind off 8 stitches over here for the underarm, and then we would continue with our shaping over here also. Let me show you what that means. As I pull this in, this is really high tech, I'm telling you. But you know what? This is the best way I knew how to explain what it is you have done with this vest. So all this is, it's a piece of paper that I have cut up, okay? So I have maneuvered it. Because what you've done with this vest is create one solid piece. You've cast on the total number of stitches for the entire vest. And you've worked in pattern. So you have worked the right front, the back, and the left front all the way up to where it's time to divide for these sections, okay? So once you've worked up to those sections, we put all of these stitches on a holder. I'm going to scooch this down. All of these stitches on a holder, and we just worked these. So this is where we did our shaping, and then we worked straight up until it measured the correct measurement, and then we bound off these stitches that are going to be our shoulder stitches. Then we came back, we took our needle, we put this number of stitches back on our needle, and then we immediately bound off 8 stitches, and then we would carry on knitting using the striping pattern all the way until this piece of the vest measured the same height as this piece right here. Okay, then we bound off all of these stitches. The last bit would be we have these last stitches on our needle or on our scrap yarn. See, they're on holder. And so we would bind off 8 stitches and do our shaping at the same time to get our left front shaping. Once the shaping or the decreasing is complete, you work straight up until it measures the same as the left front and the back, and you bound off all those stitches for your shoulder seam. Now I wrote seam on here because I want you to notice that as you fold these pieces in, so I'm going to fold them just as if it was a vest, this part of the back and this part of the back actually will seam together to this shoulder of the front and this shoulder of the front. So once those two pieces are connected, you have your nice little vest. Does that make sense? You know, personally, I felt like it was a lot easier to see what it is you're doing and how the construction works, working with the construction paper. So I hope that works for you. And yeah, there you go. Okay, now you know how to make the Child's Trendy Fur Vest. And if you're going to make the vest, why don't you go ahead and give the Child's Fur Slipper Boot a try. This is a fun pattern, and it is also for free over on redheart.com. And there's a tutorial right here on the Marley Bird YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and be sure to subscribe so that way you're up to date whenever there's a new video released. I will talk to you guys again soon. I'm Marley Bird, proud spokesperson for Red Heart Yarns. Thank you.